Now if we create a new file inside of the test directory and call it shopping list-list.js, if we now open this file, in Jasmine, all tests are wrapped with the describe statement. So describe, and then we give the describe statement some meaningful description. In our case, the first one, we're going to be testing the helper factory. So we're going to call it helper factory test, then comma and a function. Semicolon after all this. First of all, we're going to create a few variables. So variable, first one will be helper factory, which will basically be an instance of our service, our factory. Then we're going to create an array of a few items. So items equals and the array. And inside of this array, we're going to create ID 1, item apples. Then we go for quantity 1, type 2, and done. Let's give it number 1 for done, technically completed item. Then the next one, if we copy, obviously ID will be 2 this time. Item, let's give it a bread, for instance. Quantity, also 1. Type, this time 1. And done, 1 as well. If we now copy this, paste it underneath, then ID 3. Item will be bananas. Quantity 2. Type 2. And done, 0. Then the last one, let's give it 4 for the ID. Item will be purse. Quantity 1, type 2, and done, also 0. And we don't need obviously this last comma because this is the last item in the array. Then comma and this items equals empty array and semicolon after all this. Now what we're doing here, rather than calling Ajax method to obviously populate the data from a database, we simply define these items here manually. We're creating this array, which would be basically returned from the database anyway. We're making sure that 2 items are completed, which is obviously done equals 1 and 2 are not. So next thing, in Jasmine, there is a statement called before each and after each. For the helper factory, we're going to be using before each. So before each, and now we can do it in 2 ways. First thing we need to do before the test, which is basically before each test, in other words, we need to obviously call our module, which is our my app module, the Angular module, obviously. So module and the name of the module inside of the brackets and single double quotes, my app. Then another before each statement. This time we're going to inject. And for the injection, we're going to use a set of brackets and a function, and we're going to inject our helper factory. Now, how are we going to inject it? We're going to use underscores. So underscore helper factory, and then underscore again. Jasmine knows straight away that they should remove this basically when they're searching for a specific obviously service that we're trying to inject. Remove these underscores. We're using this way because obviously we have already defined the private variable with the same name. That's why we're using underscores. You can use it without underscores if you have different name of the variable inside of the describe statement, but because we're using exactly same name as the factory itself, then we're gonna use this with the underscore. So now we are injecting this helper factory, and basically what we are going to do here is, bear me just a moment because I think I've, no, that's okay, semicolon after this. And what we're going to do here with this, obviously injection, is simply assign this, the instance of this factory to our helper factory variable. So helper factory equals underscore helper factory underscore, and then semicolon. Now, this is one way we can do it, or we can combine all this in one before each statement by simply creating before each and then the function, which is the method, the way I prefer to do it, basically. So module my app, and then simply inject as well the same way. So just after this one, we create this inject function. So rather than having two before each statement, we only have one. Basically, that does exactly the same thing. So you don't. It's up to you whether you prefer them on a separate lines, basically within a separate before each statement, or within one, basically wrapped with the function. Now, after before each, what we need to do with our helper factory. Our helper factory basically has just one method called filter field array by done, and that's what we're going to be testing. So in Jasmine, there is a statement called it, and then we describe what it should do. So should filter array and return records that are completed, in brackets, done. After this, comma and function. Inside of this function, what we're going to do, I'm just going to hide this browser here so you can see things a little bit clearer. And let me create a few new lines. And inside of this function, what we're going to do is simply use our this items variable and equals helper factory, and then we call our method filter field array by done, and then we pass items array which we've created earlier. We're looking for the ID, and done should be 1. Obviously, we're collecting just IDs. So expect now, and expect basically statement checks whatever is inside of the expect statement should return true basically, or false, or any other basically should return any other result, which you can test using different methods as well. But this specific one, if we just follow, so it's this items length, and now one of the methods is to equal and 2, because obviously if we scroll up, we only have 2 items that are done. So it's this one and the second one. So they obviously are marked as 1. The other 2 have 0 associated with done. So this array should basically return only 2 records, which are basically length of this array will be 2 because only 2 records will be returned. So if we now save this file and preview our spec runner in a browser, if we refresh the page, you can see we've got one test, which is obviously executed successfully. We've got everything in green. The green dot here obviously indicates that it's all good. So the first test for our helper factory has now been written. Let's move to the next video and start testing our controller.